Well, hello. This is exciting. I am pumped for today's conversation here at the Well Dwellers podcast. Joining with me again, as we were just talking a few minutes ago from a previous episode I had done years ago with John Coots. We talked about movies on my old podcast, The Inception of Wonder. But today he's joining me on the Well Dwellers podcast here in Treaty 7 lands, Calgary, Alberta. We're going to be talking about a bunch of things today related to disability, dignity, and AI, and all sorts of stuff that we'll probably dive into. So, John Coots, thanks for joining with me today.
Welcome. Good to be with you, Eric.
Yes, this will be good. So, for the listeners who are not familiar with your story and all the adventures you've been on, I know that you grew up here in Western Canada, and that you traveled abroad in Scotland and England and did some teaching over there. Do you want to share for our listeners a bit about yourself and some of the things you're about?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, probably the reason we're talking is because most recently I've been a professor here in Calgary and started out in systematics, but kind of got introduced to liberation theologies and Black theology and then disability theology, and just become very transformed really by encountering those theologies. And so that's sort of what led into some of the things we're going to talk about today. But way before that, I was, like you said, I grew up in Western Canada, all over the place: Regina, Lower Mainland, British Columbia, Edmonton, and became a pastor in the Alliance Church in Canada, evangelical denomination. And at some point kind of became more and more aware that maybe I should keep going to school, and one thing led to another, and I was doing a PhD in Scotland, like you said. I studied forgiveness and the impact that our belief in forgiveness should have on what church is, like what our interrelation dynamics are. And then from that, I pivoted back into the church, and then eventually landed a job in England where I was teaching ethics at a theological college in Bristol. And then I guess it's about 6 years ago, you were kind enough to have me on your other podcast, but right when I moved here from England, 6-7 years ago now. And then I landed the job teaching here in Calgary, which has just recently come to an end. But have been and hope to continue to be an active theologian and ethicist for the church, and specifically, as much as possible, the church in Canada. But we'll see what comes next for me. So all these things we're going to talk about today have been interests that have started out as intuitions, and through study I've learned so much, and I'm just happy to talk with you. And I know that you're keenly into all this stuff too, so this should be fun. Thanks for having me. I'm married with 4 kids. I always forget to mention them, but whatever.
That's okay. No, that's great. I'm glad you mentioned Angie and the kids. So I must also be reminded from time to time, I'm married to a wonderful woman too, and I'm not just talking about all the passions of advocacy and education.
Yeah. Although, to be fair, I mean, the kids sometimes they ask me, I call them kids, they're all kind of grown now, but like, are you going to talk about us? I'm like, no, don't worry. I'm not going to talk about you. So it's all good.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad you brought up a lot of the kind of the different diverse ways that you have explored theology and talking about forgiveness and racism and all the things that are there. Because I think one of the things I've found being involved in disabled advocacy is you can't just simply talk about the disabled community unless you're acknowledging the intersectionalities of it.
Oh, yeah.
Where human identity is a complex onion of layers, and you can't just address one layer without being willing to explore the others too. That's awesome. So God leads us into amazing worlds that way. So, and in that same stream, diving in, because I think my listeners know I tend to dive into the deep end pretty quick.
That's cool.
But, I'd like to ask you, as you think about belonging and those in the disabled community right now, personally, pastorally, and theologically, what is it that feels most fragile? What feels most hopeful as well? And just before you expand on that, I think we are at this moment, particularly here in Alberta, it feels like, but also in the world, where the disabled community is experiencing a great deal of shifting and changing and needs to, we're on this kind of precipice of fragility and struggle. And we need to find also those places of hope and what kind of future can we carve out and advocate for ourselves.
Yeah, it's a rough time right now. I feel like there was a lot of progress, I guess, on this front in terms of people's awareness of the disability community kind of growing, especially in churches, but also in society. And it's hard to see clearly right now how we're doing societally. But I mean, personally, I feel the vulnerability of the disability community and that sort of movement. Whenever, like, I don't personally have a disability, but whenever I'm in a room where I'm very aware of loved ones or friends who sort of the way the environment is or the way that people are talking, especially people in power, like preachers or so on, I can feel how it alienates them or even hurts them. Like, for example, when preachers sort of like with good intentions will start talking about anxiety and they will just sort of show that they don't really understand that anxiety is more than just sort of, for a lot of people at least, it's more than just worrying. It's actually a complicated condition that they're working on, and it actually only makes it worse to sort of spiritualize this idea that if you have anxiety, you're just not believing enough. And so I really feel that's where it hits me personally, because that's where it hits closest to home for me. But pastorally, I think about the disability community and its fragilities and its hopes right now. And I just think the threat and the problem for the disability community right now, at least in church, pastorally, hasn't changed, at least in my lifetime. The main threat is still this sort of Western church addiction that we have to quantifiable success in terms of size and efficiency and appearances, which comes from the growth of the church growth movement and so on and so forth. So that we still have this, even when we mean better, we still have this systemic sort of organizational culture from top to bottom, where I feel like at worst, we're actually unable to do what Paul says in 1 Corinthians 11, which is discern the body. Like, notice who's being alienated, notice who's left to the sidelines when we focus only on the sort of the Kens and Barbies of the world, right? So then, or the Superman or the Iron Man, And I just feel that again and again, like pastorally, that we just have not exercised the demons of sort of finance capitalism and its sort of infection of the church ethos to think of everything in terms of quantifiable growth and success. And I'm not even making a statement there about the best kind of economy. I mean, we could go there, but I'm not even talking about that. I'm just saying if you think that that's the best way to do an economy, fine, bravo. Like, that's an economic theory you can live with, but that has no place in the church, right? So, and in fact, when we allow the church to be bent to those metrics, we disgrace the body, and as Paul says in 1 Corinthians 11, we start to eat and drink death unto ourselves. Metaphorically, maybe somewhat physically, we destroy the body of Christ by letting it be infected by that. And I felt that palpably sort of growing in this church culture. I felt that palpably in my first ministry, even before I'd read any disability theology. And I started to see how disability theology is like, offers us a healing for that, like, body problem. And my first encounter with it was Henry Nouwen's In the Name of Jesus. That was that was my gateway drug, so to speak, into disability theology. And it changed. It made me want to go to church again. It made me feel like there's hope for us. But I think about today, and that was your question. I feel like a lot of people are more aware and there's been a lot of change, but as usual, the precedent and the environment gets set by the leadership and the leadership models. And I just do not feel like, at least broadly in evangelicalism, we've really healed ourselves of that really, really hurtful and destructive leadership model and sort of church ethos. And so theologically, for me, the hope is people like yourself and movements like, the conference that you're hosting in May, people of the church gathering to say, no, we're different than that. We're going to gather precisely to name our fragilities and our vulnerabilities and our limitations and to be joined in Christ and not on some sort of other way. So I have hope because there's still lots of people doing that and it's still a movement, so to speak. But I feel it's hard to read the times, right? It feels like we took 2 steps forward and we're taking 20 steps back. But the actual people I know are better than that. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not sure what we see on the news is actually indicative of how it really is for all of us. But you could probably tell me, yourself, how you feel it is.
Well, I mean, I I sometimes find or feel like a lot of, like you said, there's a lot of good leadership and good people within the leadership of the church, and even recognize some of these issues of the invisibility and the ignorance towards those who are on the margins, particularly disabled and others. But they're confined and restricted by the paradigm and the systems of the church, the economy, as you mentioned.
That's right.
Yeah. And so I think in essence, and I was kind of reflecting on this not too long ago, I was reading a blog post by Richard Beck, and he was quoting I don't know if I'm going to say this name right. Callistos Ware. Anyways, and he says, in the essence, God is infinitely transcendent, radically unknowable, utterly beyond all created being, beyond all understanding of all participation from the human side. But in his energies, God is inexhaustibly immanent, the core of everything, the heart of its heart, closer to the heart of each thing than is that thing's very own heart. And when I reflected on that, it just kind of seemed to paint this picture where the church systematically has spent so much time into the transcendent character of God and his essence that they become blind to the very eminent realities of his flesh and blood and presence with creation today. It's very much like, as I'm kind of reflecting it into my own writing on some projects I'm working on, the blind man that's on the side of the road when the disciples ask, well, why is this man born blind? There has to be some reason for it. His fault, parents' fault, or someone's fault. And Jesus says, this man's born blind so that we might see the glory of God. But they miss this because they're looking for the glory of God beyond the paradigm that they're always told and taught about systematically from past. Instead of seeing the glory present here and now within the blind man and his character present, that there is glory in the life lived in blindness, in disability, in struggle and strife.
Yeah.
So I think the church is very much still struggling with that loss of sight to the eminent realities of God's beauty here today.
Yeah, and I don't know what to blame it on, but I mean, I don't know if it's a theology problem or a spirituality problem or just a laziness thing, but like we do fall into this, we fall back into religion, which is, God remains this transcendent other, which is not untrue. I mean, God is a being beyond our being, but then we miss the trees for the forest, so to speak. It becomes this vague sort of deism that can sort of be shaped in whatever spiritual shape we kind of need. We're in touch with the transcendent, and that's not nothing. Like religion at that level is still somewhat maybe helpful to humanity. It's something bigger than ourselves, blah, blah, blah. But you miss the central part of the pivot from that quote. It's like, but God decided not to consider equality with God something to be grasped onto, right? Philippians 2. But, right? But decided to be this kind of God. The God that is transcendent, but in that transcendence shares the glory, so to speak. And not like someone divvying out birthday cake at a party, but like the glory of God is going to be known in the communion of creatures with one another and God, right? Like, I don't know if this word works, but like, I think about that Philippians 2 passage, and it's like when God decides to be Jesus, God refuses the singularity and chooses instead the pluriformity, the multiplicity of creatures. By sharing the glory, it doesn't diminish it, but it enhances it. Right. And so when our spiritualities only stay on the plane of, I'm going to have like a encounter with the transcendent, and I close my eyes and I feel it. Well, that might be something. I mean, that's not nothing, but it's not going all the way. Like Christian spirituality is opening your eyes and now recognizing that the majesty of God is in the humility of service. Right. And this is, again, like one of the things that not only disability theology, but disability community unlocks for us is like, by saying, hey, notice us. If you don't put a wheelchair ramp up, I can't get into your sanctuary. We're all like, oh yeah, we should do that. And then we're also transformed because we just became a little bit more like the community that God is here to make amongst us, right? And Bart, I mean, you quoted Callistos Ware, and it reminded me of Karl Barth. He says, we're looking for the majesty of God, and we miss it if we don't notice that the majesty of God is in the humility of God. Like, that is the majesty. You're not like looking behind it for some other sort of like glowing orb that it's disguising. No, the majesty is the humility, right? So, and again, I don't know what to blame it on, but we lose that because we reduce ourselves to mere spirituality, right? You got me riffing there.
No, that's good. For your birthday cake there, comment kind of made me think about the icing and the cake, right? For our foodie listeners out there, we can get drunk on icing and fat on icing, but if we don't get to the cake itself and recognize that the cake is actually the main part of the whole treat, then we're missing it. But yeah. Trying to land this a bit in some practical ways. I think many church conversations still treat disability as a problem to solve. Even your mention of the ramp, right? A lot of churches approach this where, I just need to make my building accessible and then we're all good. I've met the requirements, rather than a place where God is already speaking and a people to which he's speaking through, particularly in the exclusion fashion. As an example, we don't have, I guess I've heard this before, and this is kind of a struggle, when it comes to creating gathering spaces for leaders to hear the voices of disabled and experience some of the ways that they can reflect the glory of God. But I'll hear this voice of, well, we don't really have a special needs ministry, setting aside the whole struggle with terminology, special needs. But we don't have a special needs ministry. So we don't feel that we have any place or reason to be a part of that. We'll leave that for those who are part of that kind of movement. And they'll even default it to me. Well, you're disabled. Why don't you get involved? I am involved. And that's why I'm inviting you to come and see and hear that God is good. So why do you think that the disabled community seem to continue to remain invisible to the church when it's really like over a quarter of the population in Canada? Here in Alberta, where 27% of the population is considered disabled. So what's the reasons behind that?
Well, I mean, there's probably a lot, right? And I mean, you will have better answers to this than I would. On the other hand, I'm not sure which thing is better, to not have a special needs ministry or disability ministry, or to have one. Because on one hand, one of the things that happens once you start one, it plays into this whole idea that, well, if we need to, it's a problem to be solved, so we'll put a program in place. It almost plays back into the old sort of medical model. Well, we'll create an institution over there and put, in this case, I'm thinking of mental health institutions. We'll put those people over there when they get the care they need, but now they're out of sight, out of mind. That's what happens when you create a program for something and then shove it to the side. That can end up being worse because you actually haven't, you can say you include or even serve this group or another group, but if church is what we say it is, you really haven't included until like they're participant members in the right. And so in some ways it'd be better not to have like a separate program, and it would be better to say, okay, well, how can we get you in a position here where we need you? Like, what can you do here in our regular ministries, right? And I'm using the word do, which is very ableist, but like what is your contribution here? And like asking the specific questions. So like, I know the pressure that pastors are under, and they're already burning the candle at both ends usually. So we feel like, well, now that I'm awake to this problem, we better create a ministry for it. And this is where it all goes off the rails. Like I could imagine it'd be like, oh yeah, our balcony's not wheelchair accessible, so let's spend a cool million to build an elevator in our church. And like that's cool because I'm sure people that helps would be glad to be on the balcony. But if I'd asked them, they might say, well, just before you throw a million at that, here's like a list of 10 things we could actually do to make this a place where we belong and contribute. Right. And I would just skip straight to the problem solving, thinking that I'm still the genius that knows everything, rather than doing the thing that disability theology asks you to do, which is be attentive and learn from the actual people around you, the different kinds of flavors of humanity that there are that we could learn. Usually like people are already offering what they have to give. I'm just not noticing it. Right. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, like churches do need to start projects. Projects are usually like, there's lots of people sitting around going, I would probably do something in this church if there was a project I could work on. Lots of untapped gifts and talents. And so sometimes it does mean, asking the people who are on the margins of the community, how could you be more fully a member here, a contributing member, participating member? And you get that list of 10 things from them and you start saying, okay, well, there's some things we can start doing. And then you put the call out and people start working on projects. And the way that can be helpful is if the projects themselves become, even before we're done the project, it becomes us activating this sort of this unused muscle or whatever, like this, we're activating it already just by working together towards some new end, And so projects aren't, a problem to be solved means let's put projects, but it's if it's attentive and if we're asking everyone to contribute and being attentive to the gifts and things that they bring to that project, and the project itself is the project. It's making us the church even before we're done it. I don't know. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I remember years ago hearing Mike Breen talking about endoskeletons and exoskeletons. The idea, talking about, from Ezekiel, I think it's Ezekiel 18, the dry bones, where, we can get ahead of the game, where we're trying to build muscle on the practicalities of, I even get asked, so what are the practical steps to creating disability ministries and activities? And I think we get the muscles or the cart before the horse type thing before we actually get to that exoskeleton, that thing that holds it all together. Mm-hmm. And it's important to identify that. I talk about, as I recently wrote in the Canadian Psychology magazine, we need to define disability first. And if you're going to define disability in your local church community, you need to spend time with those who are disabled in not just your church, but your neighborhood. That's my missional side, right? Spend time with the disabled who are in your neighborhood and find out and understand what is disability in your community and neighborhood. Yeah. And it's more than just a medical model defined reality. There's a lot more to it. And once we understand as a local community what that is, that's when we can start building those muscles on that exoskeleton, those projects. They are important. Absolutely. They are important. Yeah. So we need to define that understanding first.
Locally, it remains an abstraction. I mean, disability is like a huge umbrella, right? Like you have to at some point turn to your community and say, okay, who's here? And like you said, our neighborhood. Who's here or would be here, and let's go there. Otherwise, it's just abstract. Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah. No, that's good. And then that's another point is I remember presenting at First not too long ago, talking about the fact that when we have that population of 1 in 4 being disabled, or 1 in 3 in Alberta, is that reflected in our church? And if it's not, then we need to seek it outwards too. We need to recognize that, well, why aren't they? Because the population is there. If we're not seeing it, it's somewhere near us. And when we share that gospel, that creates I got to be careful my wording here, that creates the relational tension and need to bridge out, to build the muscles that will create the body of Christ, the gospel that needs to put on flesh in our church.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Oh, we could hang out here for a long time. I do want to talk a bit about the idea of the banquet, because you mentioned about the upcoming Deeper Communion conference, and I am excited for this. I know you're talking about the Superman and the Barbie mentality culture. I'm excited for this. So, but let me just phrase this for our listeners. In May, we are having the Deeper Communion National Conference, where we're really coming out of the theme of Luke 14, and this banquet of belonging theme. Particularly verse 13, 14, where we reflect on, but when you give a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind, and you will be blessed. John is going to be our keynote speaker, and he's going to be sharing some amazing things. So watch for upcoming stuff to sign up to come see him speak at First Alliance Church May 6th and 7th. Well, you're speaking on 7th. I guess I'm doing the 6th, so that's kind of scary.
Not just me. You're speaking too.
So in this vision, Jesus imagines a banquet where the guest list is intentionally disrupted. What does Luke 14 reveal about God's economy for belonging? And who are the people we still invite in theory, but exclude in practice?
That's such a good question. And I mean, you're reading that parable so well by connecting it to these themes. I mean, the verses that stick out are the verse, when you give a banquet, invite the poor, crippled, the lame, the blind, and you will be blessed. I think it's pretty easy for us, I mean, the majority sort of abled, middle class people, we think, oh, you'll be blessed. And we immediately think of the sort of like psychologists talk about the philanthropic boost you get for your morale when you help others. And we think, oh, that's what the blessing is. If you help others, you'll feel better about yourself and your world, and you'll get that philanthropy boost. I've done something here. And that's not unreal. I mean, that's true. You feel better when you do things for others. But I don't think that's what the blessing is. The blessing is, if you have this kind of banquet, you will be blessed because you'll be transformed to be able to receive the gifts that these marginalized minorities bring to the community. They will bless you in ways that you did not think possible because you never thought to include them before. And so that vision of that banqueting table, the brilliant one for you to use in these in these themes. So I don't know, I think you use the word economy, right? So God's economy of belonging. And we already got into this a little bit, but what are we talking about when we're talking about economy? We're talking about, I don't know if this is a dictionary definition, but an economy is the functions and the systems that we use to cultivate value and nurture sort of the common good, right? And that can refer to like a marketplace. But I mean, you've read enough to know that when academics talk about economies, they're talking about like social dynamics we create to build the kind of community we want. That's like the way it works. The systems actually create community. And the problem is our church economy shouldn't run like a marketplace or like an entertainment industry or a fashion industry, even though, in church we dabble in all these things. But the church has a totally other ethos, and that economy of that banquet where you're blessed by others is the economy we're supposed to be shaped by. And unfortunately, again, not to complain too much, but I feel like a lot of our Western evangelical mindset, we've allowed the church, our understanding of a church, to be co-opted by like marketplace economy. So the functions and systems by which we cultivate our environment, we accidentally sort of cultivate a sort of shareholder value building group, right? We are thinking about who our stakeholders are, and we don't mean the poor and the crippled and the lame and the blind. We mean the people who will be movers and shakers and big donors. Those are our stakeholders. Those are the people we can't upset. Well, you just gave the game away. I mean, you're not a church anymore, really, functionally, or at least in your attitude. And so that vision of that banquet table has to be way more than like, hey, if you do nice things, you'll feel a philanthropic buzz. right? I mean, that's true, but like it's just so much deeper than that. It's showing you an economy, like a kind of community. And that connects right back into 1 Corinthians 11. It's like discern the body. What kind of group is this? If some people are getting communion, and then the poor workers who come in late from the fields are coming in late and get sloppy leftovers, and they have to sit in the back room on the kids' table, which is frankly is where I'd rather be. But like, let's pretend like that's a bad place to be. You had communion and you insulted the Lord in the way you had it. Like you actually like blockaded the Lord from making it the kind of communion it's supposed to be. And I think that like ties right into this passage. Like you didn't have the kind of banquet this is supposed to be. And so, God is gracious to still do something in your lives through this act of worship, but you're in very serious danger of turning that act of worship into an act of like anti-Christian idolatry worship, so, and that's, I don't think I'm exaggerating. I mean, that's basically what these passages mean, if you ask me.
Can you give maybe an example or thought? Like, we're talking about the church in a lot of ways in this way, but I think that by the church doing this, it is reflecting more of a worldly activity, a worldly model. Can you give maybe like a reflective to how the world does this?
I mean, like even businesses, which have the most excuse for operating according to like a market economy, even businesses fall into this idea of turning their business into sort of cookie cutter operations that lose the sense of the local and the individual contributions of their employees, because everyone has to put who they are behind them at the door and come and be a kind of like an on brand clone of whatever the sort of brand is, right? But even more so in other associations that aren't supposed to be bent towards profit and efficiency and success. Wherever we sort of look past the particularities and limitations of the individuals in our community and just insist that everybody be, this is what I mean by the Superman and Barbie motif, to sort of like a cookie cutter norm of what it looks like to belong, then we're just falling for it all over again. And we're turning everything from our soccer clubs to our swimming communities to our, I don't know, you name it, whatever clubs people join, into sort of marginalizing spaces. Or we distort, like even take the arts. We distort the arts so that everything has to be fashioned after the blockbusters rather than, like we lose all the creativity. And so this happens in every industry, right? Everything gets bent to the bottom line. And thank God, though, our world is often better than that. Like all these communities I've named, you can find in any city probably really good examples of businesses and artists and football clubs that are saying, no, we're not here just for profit. We gotta make budget, but we're here to be a community place and to pay attention to the actual people that come through the door. And to that extent, I think neighborhood stuff sometimes is out ahead of the church. Sometimes on this stuff, we could learn something.
Hmm. I am beginning to try and bite my tongue because I know that I could get into some trouble here with
with me. You want to disagree with me? Go ahead.
No, I am in total agreement with you. What I'm thinking of is reflecting on back when we were talking about how the pastoral leadership in the churches have to set aside, as using your words, set aside their identity and character and values and stuff to suit the role that they've been given for a system, and the loss that is. It brings tears to my eyes and it makes me weep, but the prophetic side of me becomes kind of angry, kind of upset that we're losing that relational.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't know if you want to elaborate and get yourself in trouble, but like, I'll tell you a place where I've felt this every year is when we would graduate students from the seminary or university, and I would know this student would make a really good pastor someday, maybe even right away. But usually, it takes a few years to come into your sweet spot. And then my worry is, but I know that they don't fit the mold in most of the churches that they're going to apply to, and that mold will either crush them or keep them out. And if churches could just expand a little bit of their understanding of what it looks like to be a pastor and adapt to that, there are just so many kind of hidden gems, usually among the younger people, but often too among like mid-career people who they don't quite fit that sort of mold, but they're going to give it a go, and they've followed Christ into seminary and now they're on their way out. I'm just like, well, I hope there are churches for you, and I don't want to be a downer, but you got to really stick this out until you find someone that's willing to accept the particularities of what you'll bring to this office rather than expect you to be, insert celebrity pastor here, right? Whatever mold they think you need to. And that's just makes me sad too. But to be fair, a lot of times I get surprised by people that quote unquote make it and churches that are better than I think they are. So who knows?
Yeah, I think without expanding on it too much, it's pretty obvious. We do not see a lot of disabled pastors in our churches. So I think, not sharing personal experiences and stories, I think it's very true that that celebrity model does not allow much room for disabled representation in that way. I'll just say that, but I do also because my background is house church community and the real organic nature of it. I think size is a very big component and reason why that kind of loss to the system happens is because we want that size, we want that cookie cutter model, and we lose the relational construct which the original church was meant to be. And for me as a house church guy, I'd say we need to return to that. And I'm not talking about we have to be these small little tiny knit traveling 12 within the neighborhood. I'm saying that we need to recognize that small is strength and relational connection and this, you back to the dry bones, the sinews that sew us together are found when we're willing to spend that more organic time together and redefine the church as a traveling through life commitment as opposed to a Sunday morning experience.
Yeah. It's tough when size is a tough one because it kind of depends how you approach big church, mega church stuff. Like you can have mega churches that still build pocket communities where you can find a place, you can find your place. And the bigger churches that leverage their larger resources to be able to have more capacity to meet needs of people that do have needs. And also they can do more things in the community than maybe a tiny church can. There are ways to leverage that in ways that don't give up on that thing that the house church is supposed to give, which is real belonging and real relationships with people. But I'm with you. I mean, the only way a megachurch can really be good is if it contains within it the house church, and many of them, and leverages its resources in order to facilitate that rather than become this sort of, the entertainment model. It's just it's just the stage. That's it. That's all it is.
Yeah. I have to really push that. There's more to it than just that.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things I wrestle with too from the disabled advocacy is I'm recognizing a real need that if we're going to highlight the importance of defining disability within our neighborhood and giving voice to it, we have to raise that community up to more visibility, which means coming out of just the small pockets that they grow and exist in and being held up into a larger environment of visibility. And I don't know how to, I am wrestling with that. How can I do this and do it right? And maybe I have a bit of that perfectionism in me that I'm nervous to put it up there because I don't want to take the wrong, I would say step, but I'll just say roll the wrong push towards an environment that's only going to cause more harm. I don't want to do that. So how can we do this right and raise it up in a healthy manner?
Yeah, and that's one of the ways that when you are a big church or a mega church, there's much more pressure or even maybe need for a felt need, at least, for the communication and the stage stuff to be kind of polished, right? And so there's at least a temptation to have less room for the worship leader or the person who reads scripture who, it's going to take them a little bit longer to read it, right? our obsession with polish means that, I'll never lead worship. I can play guitar and sort of sing, but I'm not going to get up there because I don't have the polish or the skill, And so we sort of have to change our perfectionism about why can't so and so read the scripture today or say the prayer? It's because they have an intellectual disability or whatever it is. Like, why? Like, what are we doing? And that's probably harder when the pressure is on for the stage to be really polished. Some people are there for the experience that the polished sort of big band music gives them. And if you don't provide that, they're going to leave, and pastors really feel that pressure. But again, I'm like, what are we doing here?
Mm.
I don't know. I'm riffing.
This is actually a perfect launching pad into something else that I do really want to talk about, that idea, the pursuit of the perfect polished expression. And that is the AI conversation. And I know, I remember listening a few months ago when you were on Michael Morelli's podcast, Personal Manifesto.
Yeah.
And I was audibly, I think Bonnie was hearing me, but I was audibly responding to the two of you while listening to it, which is great. So I was excited to talk to you about it too. You have written a lot about and lectured on AI through the lens of this creaturely interdependence that you spoke of. And I'd like to kind of look at that a bit too. But in one quote, you said, at best, technology represents humanity's creative effort to foster connection. At worst, it distorts reality to the further exacerbation of estrangement.
Yeah.
Perfect to what we were just talking about.
Yeah.
Can you share a bit more about your thoughts here and expand on that creaturely independent?
Yeah. So, I mean, the caveat here is I want to say people, when you denounce AI, as I'm about to do, people might say, oh, an anti-technology person, right? He probably doesn't even have a phone. What are we supposed to all go back to buggies and horses or whatever? And I'm like, I don't want to be reactionary against technology. And in fact, that would make me a hypocrite. I love texting. I love streaming movies. I love cities. So, and there's way too many simplistic answers out there about technology. For example, I get a little annoyed when people sort of have a reaction to smartphones and what they do to us, especially like teenagers or whatever. And then they put all the onus on like teens to get off their phones and social media use, rather than like, we don't pay attention to the thing that is the actual problem, which is actual malpractice of media corporations that have bent the internet and social media to illicit ends, sneakily doing so. And so if we just blame teens and like take their phones away, we sort of like carpet bomb the one like sort of social connection they had with all their friends, because, you live in a city where your friends are half an hour away and there's nowhere to hang out, especially in wintry Calgary. You take away a teenager's phone and you're like, you just made it worse. And we don't attend to the sort of malpractice. And so that brings us to AI in some ways. And I think there can be good and bad versions of technology. And we have to ask ourselves, well, what makes it good and what makes it bad? Right? And that quote you read, I think I was riffing, in the podcast, I was riffing off Pope Francis, his letter Laudato Si, which, that is a must read for everybody. Like, just hit pause, go read it and come back. And now, assuming everyone's done that, let's just assume everyone's read Laudato Si. He's like, look, not all technology is bad. In fact, he's talking mostly about ecological concerns, but in fact, we need to like use our ability to make good technology and bend it towards good, as in morally good. Like, let's not useful towards sort of shareholder ends or addictions. Like, what would be morally good about it? And I really latched onto like his definition. What would be good about technology is if it fostered connection. And if it didn't foster connection but exacerbated estrangement, then you would know you're in a sort of moral gray area or danger zone. And we could say, well, fostering connection, like, what do we mean? Well, and we need to expand on that. You need to foster connection in a way that isn't at the expense of some other creatures or humans, right? And so then you could say, well, a defensive AI would be, well, it fosters connection. Now I don't have to go to a library or take university classes to learn anything. I can just be connected to whatever I want. ChatGPT, summarize in plain language, Soren Kierkegaard, and it's boom, it's done. You could say, well, you just fostered connection. And I could say, well, no, you didn't. you took the librarian out of your life. You took the whole infrastructure of knowledge and research out of it. You took Soren Kierkegaard out of it, actually. And what did you put in its place? Hyperscale data centers that stole and don't footnote anything, and then gave you a polished answer that isn't necessarily true. It's just plausible. It's like a predicted answer. Okay, you could say this fostered connection, but it only appeared to. What it actually did is pretend to give you a connection with truth or knowledge or a whole knowledge community. And instead, it gave you a fraud. And now you've done damage to others and yourself. And what did we do it for? Well, to pad the already stuffed pockets of trillionaires who want to replace that huge library and university infrastructure with their own data center infrastructure that is run by 5 or 6 people in the world who will just rob us all of what? Creaturely interdependence for the quick hit, right? And it is anti-human. It's misanthropic. That's the fancy word for anti-human. And if creaturely interdependence is Christ's vision for humanity, then it's anti-Christ.
Interesting.
I mean, I know we just use it. I don't know what to put in this birthday card. ChatGPT, tell me how to say something nice to my grandma. I mean, those are very innocent uses of it, right? So I'm not trying to say, well, maybe I am suggesting that you just you might as well have used a Ouija board. And in a sense, I am saying you might as well have used a Ouija board. People don't know what a Ouija board is. When I was a teenager, it was the scariest thing imaginable. It was like where the demons live. And I am suggesting you're playing with the devil.
I want to talk about the moral and ethics behind it in a few minutes, but I don't know if you're aware. The Well did a gathering not too long ago at the Calgary Public Library downtown, where we had a number of disabled people come in, and we had a guest come in and share about AI music with Suno.com. And the idea, the hope was, can this be an avenue which can help the disabled who are verbally challenged particularly, and those that have problems expressing the very deeper struggles they're facing, find a voice and a way to express the things that are a part of their life and tell their story through a musical AI environment. So while it can be something that can lose that creaturely dependence, can it also, in the same stream, be, if I can use that word, a way to create a creaturely dependent bridge for disabled individuals?
Yeah. So, I mean, again, we're actually getting into sort of the long weeds of like, what actual technology are we talking about here? Like, is technology bad? No. I mean, lots of technology is like really good. It's really useful. Like, even an instrument in someone's hand. Like, I may not be able to sing, but whoever invented the guitar gave at least musically atonal me an avenue to express myself through guitar. Now, I hit my ceiling pretty early on, and I shouldn't be on a stage. But like, well, I'm joking. Maybe I should be. Well, like, I don't have to be. First name that comes to mind is Eddie Van Halen, but I don't know who the great guitarists are, Jack White or whatever. I don't have to be that guy, right? Like, I need to accept my own limitations, right? And if I turn to technology to turn me into something I'm not, that, to me, that's like a tipping point where it's like, well, wait, why don't I just accept that some people are better at that than me? But there are technologies that we provide or we invent to increase the capacity for sort of a wider access. Keep talking about the wheelchair ramp, the wheelchair itself, like technologies, glasses, all these other things. They are technologies that help people to be included. So in that case, I wasn't at that event. I did hear about it, but I am curious. I don't know what the actual technology is. Is it AI in the sense of like uses a hyperscale data center to like pull from the slop of data and then generate predictive music? Or is it just kind of a cool software, right? Like, I actually don't know what it is. And in ethics, the truth is always in the details, right? The devil's in the details too. But what are we actually talking about here? But I would say, I mean, it's one thing to increase access and enable self-expression by a wider group of people, which our instruments and our technologies can do. That's a good. But if technology is now being leveraged to sort of erase all difference and enable all of us to transcend our limitations and be whatever we want to be,
Mm.
I don't know. Like, I don't need to be you. Like, and you don't need to be me. We could help each other. Like, if you're good at something, I don't know what your hobbies are. I know you're into records and stuff because I follow you on Facebook. Like, you could probably teach me some things about music and open up that world to me. But it could be that I just discover you have gifts and talents that I don't have, and it would be silly for me to pretend I need to have them. Like, I can participate in your world without having to be you. I think we do that sometimes with technology. We think, oh, we shouldn't stop until this technology can break down all barriers and make everyone able to do all the things the same. Well, I don't know. Like, it's a tough one.
I think that goes right into the vein of who we are as human beings, reflecting the Imago Dei.
Yeah.
You mentioned Soren Kierkegaard. I love the quote by him and reflect often on it when he said, "Now with God's help, I shall become myself."
Yeah.
The very nature of that. But that could mean a million different things. Bonnie's kitty calendar post today was from Soren Kierkegaard. So we were talking this morning about existentialism and Kierkegaard and the whole thing. Good morning coffee conversations with your wife, right? Ultimately, it comes down to when we say, now with God's help, what God are you speaking of? How are you creaturely interdependent with your creator, the one that you find a relationship with? If you are putting Suno.com music into the role of God, then you are creating an idol that is completely, absolutely, as you said, anti-Christ, anti-Trinity, anti-God, right?
Potentially.
And it will respond and act accordingly. Absolutely. I can see that with it. I can see some of it being abused in a nature that will take that role. But you have a responsibility as a representative, an image of God, the very nature of human, to use that tool, because I use that as a tool, to reflect the creative nature. And you can take your own creative expression, put it in, and allow it to find avenues of other creative voices, like my friend Ty Reagan. His son is verbally disabled and nonverbal, but he wrote a song through Suno.com by expressing just a few simple words that came out. And what came out was this incredible song that emotionally impacted not only him, but his father and the rest of the group that was there, to connect to him on a much deeper level, creating that creaturely interdependence within those relationships. So yeah, I think it's important to recognize that when we use AI, when we use Suno, if you approach it with that existential value of idolatry, you are going to get idolatry.
Yeah.
If you approach it with the respect of recognizing your dominion as a created image of God, you will see in response a creative avenue to reflect that as well.
Yeah. And I mean, I want to be careful. Like, so there's a few ways to come at a technology. One is on the level of user interface. And you could say there are potentially healthy ways to use this, and even like individual benefits that could come from using this thing. And then there are the larger scale questions like, yeah, but what does this tool, what is the collateral damage that this tool does when used sort of en masse, right? And if there are dangers in sort of implementing this tool in such a widespread way that it creates new social norms, then even though on the level of user interface, you might be able to say there are some individual ways to curtail your use and even get some benefits out of it, you could still say the technology and the way it's being wielded or shaped is changing social dynamics in a way that is a net, even if you can look at kind of healthy user interface. And so sometimes what I'm talking about is I'm evaluating the larger scale sort of transformations that technology brings about. And then the counterpoint is like, yeah, but look at these individual benefits. Be like, yeah, okay. But then you could ask the question, well, what if we curtailed these larger harms and allowed this invention to release our imaginations so that we could get all those individual user benefits in a way that doesn't pivot to these larger harms? And the first thing I can think of that comes to mind is, and again, I don't want to talk about, your friend Ty's son, and I'm not making any judgment on that, but the thing that comes to mind is I remember this video that went viral not long ago where Chris Martin of Coldplay was meeting with Dick Van Dyke on his like 100th birthday or something like that, and he helped Dick Van Dyke write a song, and it was actually kind of a nice little song, and they just made it up together on the spot. And I think if I remember he got Dick Van Dyke sort of teary-eyed because he'd helped. Dick Van Dyke's not a musician, really. He'd helped him sort of express something musically, and I just think that's what that triggers in my imagination. Why don't we have more? And I know we do have these at community centers around the world. It's like, hey, come and learn to do pottery. You may not be good at pottery, but you're gonna like express yourself through pottery, and I will go make a lousy ashtray, but I will maybe not an ashtray. We don't use those anymore, but I'll go it is all that, but and maybe we've used certain technologies, but we haven't turned it into this technological product that takes all of the humanity out of it. Instead, we've leveraged technology into like a fostering of greater like sort of community love and support and sharing of our gifts and talents. And to me, that's the exciting sort of stuff that makes me imagine, But we too often, someone invents something and it just gets shoved into humanity until we've got a whole new set of social dynamics that ends up starting out fairly inclusive, but ends up alienating us down the road anyways. You know what I'm saying?
And I get what you talk about, and you and Michael both are ethicists. So the importance of teaching AI ethics and morality. I look from the disabled perspective, and I see the amazing way technologies has reshaped and even expanded the lifespan of the disabled community. Stephen Hawking's, with his ability to redefine intellect itself through the use of technology and his speaking devices, his wheelchair. And, even the wheelchair itself, when I first was in a wheelchair from my spinal cord injury, there has been huge leaps and advancements in just manual wheelchairs alone that can improve the lives of those who use them.
Absolutely. And those are technologies that have been put to good ends, But when we're talking about AI, we're talking about now imagine you could download Stephen Hawking's brain, mimic his voice, and keep presenting Stephen Hawking everywhere around the world, even after he's dead. That's what AI is, right? We're beyond the pale of technologies that enable Stephen Hawking to give us everything he's got. And now we don't even need Stephen Hawking to get Stephen Hawking anymore. That's the difference.
Well, so what I'm very curious about is how can we see disability theology and disability community as an avenue or a way to teach AI ethics and morality? Can we teach ethics and morality? And I say that with the sense of great responsibility, because I hear what you and Michael are saying, but I also am concerned that I think AI is, I'll just say it, I think AI is here to stay. I don't think we're going to be able to avoid it. We're not going to be able to switch the off switch in AI development. I wish we could in some senses, because I can see what it's doing to our world environmentally alone, but I don't think we're going to be able to switch the off switch. So we have a responsibility to teach it moral and ethics. How are we going to do this?
Yeah, I just don't even think you should use it. I mean, but you're right. You're going to use it without knowing it. I'd probably use it without knowing it. If I had to use ChatGPT, I would ask it to give me footnotes and then provide me a link to the author it's citing. And it probably won't be able to, or it'll make one up. It makes it up all the time. But if I had to use it, I would push it to do the things that we expect humans to do, which is tell me what human said that and where it is. Uh, but no, I mean, yeah, it's here to stay because the the tech oligarchy is thrusting it upon us so that and it's a vicious cycle so that we can have populist governments that aren't accountable to infrastructures of research and care and policy making and you know what our premier in Alberta calls red tape. Red tape is the thing that keeps us within the lines of creaturely care and carefulness. Yes, policy is going to get out of hand. They need to be refined, but you get populist, tyrannical rule when you just you take all the shortcuts away. So I mean, I know it's here to stay, but I do think we should resist as much as possible. Now, I think you can be reckless about resistance so that, and this is where I want to be careful and I really want to listen to voices like yourselves. I am so against it that I might miss some of its better uses, or maybe some AI adjacent technologies, like again, that music software. I don't know what it is. I don't know how it, I'm not gifted enough in information technology to even be able to look under the hood and know what I'm seeing. But experts could diagnose it and say, actually, this is probably a useful technology. And I would miss that if I was just having a blanket overreaction to the whole thing. So I think there's a lot of room for the question you just asked about specific uses and technologies. And I think this is where, as a church and as like ethicists and universities, we have to say, okay, let's consider this one. What is this one doing? How are we using it? How could we bend it to good rather than evil? And to the extent that AI is here to stay, then I think that's the kind of like careful discernment that has to be done. But I also think creative resistance is going to be really, really, really important. And I will err on the side of resistance. But I also got to put my money where my mouth is. If I'm going to denounce a certain technology, I should probably ask experts, people who know how it works, who have been in the rooms. Like last time I spoke in Kamloops, a person came up to me afterward. A couple people came afterwards and talked to me about my talk about AI, and they are IT guys. Like they're in IT. And they're like, I've been in the rooms where we could have made a certain decision to make the IT stuff that we were using more like healthy, personally or a corporation. But we made the other decision, and hopefully I'm not oversharing. I'm not going to share the guy's name, but one guy said I had to leave because we kept on making the wrong decision when we came to forks in the road. And I'm not an expert in IT. I don't know. I couldn't even use the words he used to explain what those decisions were. But I think we have to lean on the people that actually know the thing and know how it could be used to the good. Right? And my point is, on the larger scale level, the current way generative AI is being thrust into society is not to be trusted, right? Mm-hmm. But I don't want to overreact and just say none of it. Like we probably should be asking the detailed questions you're asking. But I'm gonna be it's guilty until proven innocent guy on this one. That's just the way I'm gonna be.
Okay, yeah, but I think you're touching on something too that we can do is very important. Is even as disabled advocates, is holding those who are part of creating AI and its technologies accountable, entirely accountable.
Yeah.
And in doing our best to force a moral and ethical responsibility to create it properly.
Yeah.
And for the betterment of humanity and not for the oligarchies that you pointed to. That is one way we can do that too. Trying really hard not to mention politics and politician names in that, but also I want to touch on social justice activities too for disabled advocacy. And, when we started out, we started talking about the fragility and the precipice, that we come to from those in the disabled community here in Alberta and in Canada, euthanasia laws. When we talk about public policies being created or not being created, as there's no disabled advocate in the Alberta government, which is really sad to say. Financial security, as we've been struggling with AGE and the stupid ADAP program that's coming. Transit, healthcare access, and digital infrastructure as it seems to reveal whose lives are being prioritized by leaders and politicians right now. What role should the church play in reprioritizing these issues for the disabled and marginalized communities?
Oh boy. I mean, it all feels really overwhelming right now, um, I think the reason it's overwhelming is because it used to feel like you could take any given social justice or political topic and you could feel like, okay, if we as a church say if I was in a church of 200 and we really got passionate about something in our city or our neighborhood that was like unjust or marginalizing and we wanted to really put an effort into changing it. I used to feel like you sort of knew where you could go. Like you had like a functioning democracy where you could like um access the halls of power and figure out what to do. But I just feel like I don't know how that works anymore. Like, but I want to try not to be so cynical and just say like, where can the church get involved? I think it's the kind of things we keep coming back to is like the attentiveness. So one of, if not the greatest thing about the church, and here I'll use capital C global church, is that the church is the church globally and across history. And every place there's a local church, it's a microcosm of the body of Christ. And so the more churches, the better. Because if you have a local church in every neighborhood or on every sort of 10-block square, then you could kind of say, look, we're going to have a bunch of stuff that we all do together, say the university system, ecumenical work, big, huge social justice projects, federal, organizations like the EFC and stuff like that. They'll do the big stuff. But every local church is now going to take a kind of responsibility for what we used to call the parish, right? The plot of earth and the people that are there and the animals and the water systems. Oh, and see what I just did? I was like, oh, we're going to actually take a certain measure of like Christian responsibility for this plot of land. And that's going to mean now we're in projects phase. As soon as you preach this a few Sundays in a row, people come up to you and be like, well, what should I do? And I'll be like, well, I mean, the first thing we should do is like learn where we are. What did we pave over to get this church, right? And I mean, I mentioned this to you before when we were dialoguing back and forth for today. When Willie Jennings was here a few years ago to give a series of lectures, I was driving him around. I was the organizer of this event. When I would drive him back to his hotel, I would pick his brain a little bit. We would chat. He's a really friendly guy. People don't know who Willie Jennings is. They should read his Acts commentary or his Christian Imagination. He's a Black theologian, liberation theologian, really, really important stuff. But he was talking on these series of lectures about how to be human, I'm paraphrasing, but to be human, we need to be creatures. And to be creatures, we need to be in connection with the other creatures and God's creation. Otherwise, we sort of cut off a big part of humanity. And so he was talking about learning again to relate to the land. And so I asked him on the ride home, like, yeah, but so say there's like some pastors in the room who go back to their churches of 200. What are they supposed to do? He's like, well, just start like preaching the gospel. And he didn't say this, but like we got to the point where he's like, preach a gospel that is multidimensional. It's not just about the individual soul. It's about the reconciliation of all things. And that includes the land. And once you've done that and someone comes forward and says, what should we do? You say something like, and here's what he actually said. Say, well, let's get a volunteer to start going to city council meetings on our behalf and just take notes. What decisions are being made about our neighborhood? And where does the gospel sort of get touched on? Or where could we collectively like put our heads together and figure out what the gospel might say about that? He said, I guarantee you, if you have churches that do that, within a year, you'll be way in over your heads. Wow. Like you'll be like, oh my goodness, there are so many ways that we could serve Christ in this neighborhood. Everything from that intersection has needed a 4-way stop for years. Someone's going to get killed. We're going to get it made. Oh, we've redirected this waterway 5 decades ago, and now we're paying the price for it. Or we displaced this indigenous group centuries ago from this land. Maybe we should if we're going to still be here, maybe we should pay attention to how that could be repaired. Now you're like I said, you're in the deep end, but it's like a good thing because at least now you're swimming, And when Jennings said that to me, and I've taken way longer to say it than he did. By now he would have been in his hotel room. But I was on my drive home and you're like, yeah, of course. Like, I'm so glad he didn't give me some sort of like high abstract answer. He just like send somebody to city council meetings or whatever the equivalent of that is, you know?
Yes. See, I love that. I wish I had got to go to some of his lectures. That would have been really exciting. But this is right in the missional vein of my past. That is something that I have always advocated and would love to see in a disabled ministry, is that we are doing that very thing where we're, I love his idea. Send someone to take notes at the political meetings. Why do we always default it? Oh, that's my alderman's job. No, 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 no. No, let's, as a church who's embodying the presence of Christ in our neighborhood, have someone present, taking notes what's happening in our neighborhood and the needs that are there, particularly, and maybe even expanding that, going from, dare I say, door to door, neighbors talking, because from the disabled perspective, we could identify so many inaccessibilities, the social structure of disability, and address it ourselves, talking about cutting red tape. How can the church do this? The financial needs that are being faced, the caregiving needs. This is a huge thing that I've been advocating for. We have a huge body of Christ followers who, in first century cared for who? The disabled. How do you think the lame, paralyzed man got to the feet of Jesus? Was because his friends picked him up, carried him, ripped the roof off, lowered him in. That's all part of the faith walk, as Jesus articulated in that whole passage. It is by your faith he is healed. He is brought to the presence of the living Christ. And that, and it gets me so excited. We need someone in our local churches to be part of those meetings, to take those notes, and then ask that theological deep question of what is it that we as the body of Christ can do here?
And just to reiterate an earlier point, to follow up on that story of the friends that lower the man down and then Jesus welcomes him, your mention of that parable of the banquet is what it would look like for that group of people in that house to learn the lesson of that moment and say, what would it be like for us to construct our gatherings in such a way that we don't have to have people tearing the roof off to get in next time? Like, that's what it looks. The parable of the banquet is what it looks like to follow up on what that episode entailed, And also back to the get someone to go take notes at the city council thing. Again, you've already changed your church and your neighborhood before you even got it through to put up the four-way stop or whatever, the success at the end of the project. You've already transformed your church because you found a person who's going to volunteer to spend a year going to city council meetings and take notes. That person now has a job in your church, like that they probably didn't have before. Like you're pulling on gifts and skills and passions that just were dormant. And that person hears something at a couple city council meetings in a row and comes back to the church. Is like, I got to figure out something here. And he or she goes to people in church and asks them questions, or goes knocking on doors in the neighborhood. What do you think about this sidewalk they're going to make? That person has now exercised the spiritual gifts of like attentiveness and brought other people in long before we stopped the building of the sidewalk or got a playground built or a four-way stop. The church has already been changed by that. And the pastor didn't even do anything, right? Except for just like, hey, go and report back. Like, it's just so transformative because it's multidimensional. It's learned something, and it wants to learn more from the people and the neighborhood. Sorry, I'm getting excited.
Yeah. No, me too. I'm actually thinking too, it also restructures and reframes what our understanding of the miraculous is. Jesus says you will go and do even greater things than I, right? Your talk about how can we do the banquet better than having to have people rip off roofs and lower them in and stuff. The very act that they committed there was the miracle itself in that whole parable, right?
Yes.
It was the inclusion of belonging that took place. That is the miracle that those friends had orchestrated, not
Yeah.
to get up and walk.
Yeah.
And I think that if that, all the other people in that house, the Pharisees and all the people that had crowded it so much, had witnessed that and asked that question, how can we make this banquet even better so that they don't have to go through that? They will be engaging in miracle work themselves.
Yeah.
So the simplicity of going to those city meetings, to seeing the needs in the neighborhood and the community, and then actually acting out and carrying out
Yeah.
the fulfillment of them,
Yeah.
that is miracle work that
Yeah.
the church is involved in.
Yeah. You're making me think of this movie, Sound of Metal. Have you seen Sound of Metal?
I've heard of it, but I haven't
Oh my
seen it.
goodness. It's such a good movie, but like it involves a drummer. I'll try not to do spoilers and I'll try to keep this quick because I know we're just going way off script here, but this drummer in a rock band loses his hearing, and the deaf community has a lot to teach us here. So the movie ends with, I won't spoil it, so I'll just say it presents the dilemma. What if there was technology that could make you not deaf anymore? And the deaf community is kind of, I won't say split, but there's differences of opinion on whether the cure for deafness is the miracle. And I'm not gonna stake my claim either way. In some cases it could be. But then there's this other part of the movie where before this technology has come along, he's been accepted into a deaf community. And it's really painful, but he learns to like sign language and he learns to be a part of the deaf community. And the only reason I bring it up is because I don't want to say it's either the one or the other. The technology that enables him to hear, you could call it a miracle or a healing almost. Or there's the enfolding into a deaf community and the ability to do sign language. Is that the miracle? And I want to say, like you said, there's a miracle there that isn't just reducible to sort of like a cure, like or a medical cure, right? And we could go one way or the other, and every impairment is different. So I'm not going to make some sort of grand statement about that. But the point being, for the community, the miracles are already there in the attempts to be changed to no longer be socially disabling, right? We actually have to change, and that is a miracle, right? So you can edit that out if that was a non sequitur, but it really made me think of that movie.
Yeah, that's good. I want to be respectful of time here, so I want to talk a bit about hope before we close off. And in that same sense, I think hope can come from seeing the real heroes in our neighborhoods, in our community, and telling their narratives, telling their stories. So I want to ask you, John, because you've already mentioned a few here today, but I would love to hear, who are the heroes that have shaped your vision and shaped your understanding of what it means to be Christ in the world?
Yeah, I'm not big on heroes, but and then when we each name our heroes, my heroes are theologians and like athletes. You know, it's more like favorite people kind of category. But what we really mean by heroes is like, who are the models? Who even gives you hope because you feel like, oh, they're the ones that could change things. And that's what I think of. And for me, I've been learning to see the heroes in the anti-heroes, the Sullys of this world. I don't know if people are familiar with Sully, but it's another movie reference. Well, it's another true story, right? The guy that landed the plane in the Hudson. And the movie Sully does a really great job of, he's a hero. Everyone is a hero. He lands his plane in the Hudson River. And they're like trying to get to the bottom of like what he did. And he's just like, I don't know, I just followed all the training. He was just ready for his moment because he'd done the work for like 40 years. We want a Captain America who can just come in and or like a Superman who come in and put the plane on his back and like land it. Well, every once in a while we get these heroic moments where someone does something extraordinary. But the heroes are the ones that just put in the work even when it's not getting noticed. And maybe someday it does, and the more you notice them, the more inspired you get, hopeful, because they're there. You've been missing them. I think of every church I've pastored, they're not the people that get noticed. They're the people that were there long before I got there and are there long after me, or maybe the newcomers who bring fresh life and they just do the work. Those are my heroes. As time has gone on in my life, I've got more stage time. Here I'm on a podcast with you. You and I are like on a screen for however many people watch. But the heroes are the
To say
people where
this, but this is not
I know,
a huge stage here.
I know, but in theory, you're on a screen and you feel like you're a big deal. But even then, like when you're on a stage, you're pivoting. You want to pivot to the people that are really doing the work, and those are my heroes. So I can't to name them would be to ruin it. But you know, they're the Muppets and Hobbits of the world, not the Supermen and the Wizards. Um, and when I say wizards, I mean Saruman type wizards who just use their power recklessly. I don't mean the Gandalfs of the world, of the Lord of the Rings world, who actually like just disappear for years at a time because they don't overreach with their powers. Like those the good wizards are the ones that make room for the hobbits. Those are the heroes, and there's more of them than we think. And I guess that's what gives me hope for the church. They're unnoticed, but they're there. And when you learn to see them and then even pivot to them, you start to feel hope again for not just the church, but our world. Unfortunately, their voices just get drowned out all the time in our ecosystem. And that's where I'm feeling the fragility and vulnerability. But the heroes are there. You know them. I know them. I admire you for what you plug away on. And there's untold dozens in each of our lives that we know would come to mind. And those are my heroes.
Oh, I thank you for that. When I talk about at the bottom of the well and the work I do there, a lot of that vision comes from those who feel cast down in the well, like Joseph, and find themselves in the darkness, and all they can see is that light above them. And in the struggle that's there, the hope that I hope to share in at the bottom of the well is predominantly that we might find ourselves there, but we're never alone. Yeah. We're together. And as you shared about that, one of the things that came to mind and the thoughts are the only way we can know the heroes that are around us in those moments that help us move and breathe and find life and the presence of Jesus in those dark moments is hands-on. We can't see them, but we can touch them and we can experience them in their closeness, the warmth of them, and the characters that they bring as we get to know them tangibly and connectively. I can say, John, that you are doing that today. The openness and opportunity to get to share with you here and hear your story. You become a hero to me in the sense that I'm able to experience you and your story and your life. And I'm thankful for that. It encourages me to keep going here at the bottom of the well and in the Well Dwellers podcast to have these conversations with people like yourself.
Likewise, Eric, it's just really good to be allowed to have these discussions, especially right now in my life, feeling a bit, wow, we're not going to go into my story, but it's just really good to be asked to talk about these things that we care about. So keep it up, man.
It's not a huge platform, but you always have a space here on the Well Dwellers podcast platform.
Thank you.
No, I'm really glad you were here.
Looking forward to seeing you in May for that conference. Hopefully people can join us for that.
I am very excited for that. Before I go, I would love the opportunity to ask you if you want to share what you might be working on now and some of the pursuits you might be going after.
Sure. I'm using this time that I have hopefully between jobs to finish a book I've been working on for 10 years on Dietrich Bonhoeffer and his political theology. It's going to be hopefully coming out at the end of this year, maybe early 2027. I don't know how long it takes the publishers to get it out, but it'll be with TNT Clark. And people that know me or follow me or, find me through you can find it. It's not going to be a cheap book. It's one of those academic books. But I'm putting in the work on that. And I've got some ideas for some popular level books down the road, but I just have to see what happens. So in the meantime, like you, I'm just trying to look for the conversations where they are. So I'll see you in May, if not sooner.
That is going to be so good. And for the listeners, be sure to watch for Deeper Communion's national conference this May 6th and 7th, and sign up quick when they come out. You'll find links on the website at thebottomofthewell.com, and I'll be talking about it here more on the Well Dwellers podcast. Thanks for joining me today, John.
It's been great, Eric. Thanks for chatting. All the best.